Beware of the empath who has no friends around them. When you notice them standing alone, you assume you are looking at someone broken. You tell yourself they must be weak. You imagine they have fallen apart. But that belief is false. They did not fall apart. They became aware. Carl Jung explained that real power does not chase attention. It moves toward quiet. The empath who walks alone has not escaped from life. They have stopped feeding disorder. They are not hiding. They are choosing control. And this is exactly what makes them unsettling, because the person you think you are facing is no longer there. You cannot read them the way you used to. You cannot steer them. Their empathy is no longer something you can extract from them. It has turned into a reflection that makes people uncomfortable to face. In this story, we uncover why the empath in isolation is not the weakest presence in a room, but the most dangerous one to underestimate. Their solitude began as a quiet act of self-rescue. Being alone was never random. It was the only way they could stop losing themselves. The empath did not end up alone by coincidence. There is a popular belief that people who withdraw are antisocial, socially clumsy, or incapable of bonding. That idea is shallow and ignores a deep psychological truth. No human being whose nervous system is tuned for connection chooses isolation without a serious internal reason. Psychology names it sensory overload. Spiritual traditions call it energetic exhaustion. The empath is not isolating to hide from the world. They are isolating to recover what was drained from them. This is not a personality trait. It is the result of being overwhelmed for too long. Their solitude only makes sense when you understand how an empathic nervous system functions. Carl Jung described the psyche as a system that regulates itself, much like the physical body does. When the body overheats, it sweats. That response is automatic. It is not a decision. When the psyche is exposed to constant emotional pressure for years, it eventually activates a shutdown response to prevent complete collapse. The isolation you see is that response working as it should. For most of their life, this person lived without emotional filters. Their inner doors were always open. In a crowded space, you may hear words being spoken, but the empath feels what is beneath them. They sense tension in posture, hesitation in tone, resentment that is never voiced. They do not just notice these things. Their system absorbs them. Their mind runs non-stop, processing emotional information that others ignore. Jung described participation mystique as a state where a person cannot separate themselves from others. The empath lived a modern version of this condition. They were constantly blending, constantly absorbing, constantly carrying emotional weight that was never theirs to hold. But no system can operate at full intensity forever without breaking down. Most people have experienced walking into a room and sensing something heavy in the air. They might shrug it off minutes later. The empath carries it for days. They were the ones who stayed on the phone for hours listening to the same problems repeated again and again. Not because they enjoyed it, but because they physically felt the other person's distress and could not relax until it eased. Their involvement was complete. Before they withdrew, there was not a lack of connection. There was too much of it. They were overloaded. What you see now as withdrawal is the psyche pulling an emergency lever. It is a correction. The unconscious mind, which always seeks balance, recognized that the individual was close to disappearing under the weight of others' needs. To protect the self, it forced distance. This is why their solitude feels firm and non-negotiable. It is not a mood they can turn off for social plans. It is a requirement for survival. This is where most people misunderstand them. You look at them and assume they are running away from life. You label them as sad or withdrawn. But from their inner perspective, they are finally choosing life. They reached a point where one more emotional demand would have broken them. They are not antisocial, they are full. The warning here is your assumption that they are lonely and waiting for rescue. You assume that because you fear being alone, they must fear it too. That belief is projection. Their inner orientation has shifted. They have turned their psychic energy inward. Jung described this as true introversion, not shyness, but the reclaiming of energy that was leaking into the environment. When you approach them trying to pull them back into social noise, you are misunderstanding their transformation. You think you are offering connection, but to them it feels like invasion. They spent years building internal walls not to reject others, but to protect their sanity. Withdrawal was the only way their sensitivity could survive. They learned through pain that empathy without limits is dangerous. Without solitude as a boundary, they would have been consumed by the unspoken demands of everyone around them. So they created that boundary. If you are ready to stop confusing solitude with weakness, understand this clearly. Their silence is strength. The story of the empath loner is a story of quiet loss, not because people stole from them intentionally, but because they gave themselves away piece by piece until nothing remained. This giving was rarely deliberate. It came from early conditioning and confusion about their own worth. Often, the empath child became the emotional stabilizer in their environment. This detail explains everything. Families and social groups function like systems, and systems seek balance. When parents are unstable or emotionally immature, the sensitive child steps in unconsciously. They become the calm one, the helpful one, the listener. Jung explained that the persona, the mask worn for acceptance, often forms as a way to survive. For the empath, that mask was constant availability. They learned early that love was conditional. If they could calm a parent's anger, they were safe. If they listened endlessly, they were needed. If they absorbed someone else's pain, they were valued. They became mediators everywhere they went. They were the emotional shock absorbers. At work, people unloaded their frustrations onto them. In friendships, they supported everyone involved in conflict. In relationships, they carried emotional weight that was never shared back. This created a severe imbalance inside them. Energy flowed outward endlessly, but almost nothing returned. Over time, this caused an internal deficit. They ignored their own exhaustion because someone else's discomfort felt more urgent. They listened to hours of emotional dumping because they believed it was their responsibility. That heavy feeling in their chest when the phone rang was not irritation. It was their nervous system warning them, but they ignored it. They believed boundaries meant rejection. But the unconscious mind keeps records. Every ignored need, every swallowed emotion, every act of self-erasure added pressure beneath the surface. They gave away time, attention, and life force, thinking it made them good. Eventually, there was nothing left to give. One day, they woke up empty. No patience, no empathy, no energy. The system collapsed. This is when they disappeared. People around them felt confused and offended. They said, "You changed." What they really meant was, "You stopped serving us." The empath did not turn cold. They stopped functioning as a resource. Jung warned that over-identifying with the persona leads to loss of self. The empath reached that edge and pulled back just in time. Their isolation is not bitterness, it is recovery. Their silence is not punishment, it is restoration. And the reason you should beware is simple. Someone who has reclaimed themselves is no longer easy to control, drain, or define. A loner is someone who was forced to peel away the role of the helper because it became too heavy to keep wearing. At some point, they understood that what they once called kindness was slowly turning into self-harm. Their goodness was costing them their health, their peace, and their sense of self. When they pull back from the world, they are not trying to punish anyone. They are trying to survive. They are performing an emergency act of energy recovery. They are pulling back every emotional investment they once sent outward without limits. They are closing emotional accounts that were always overdrawn. They finally see that they spent their entire lives managing the feelings, moods, and crises of other people while their own inner world slowly dried up from being ignored. Their emotional garden was never watered, only trampled. Over time, this realization is what leads them to have no friends. Many of their old friendships were built on the assumption that they would always be available, always listening, always giving. Those relationships were never designed to survive boundaries. They collapse the moment limits are introduced. The empath looks at their phone now and no longer sees warmth or connection. They see requests, expectations, emotional debts waiting to be paid. They see people who want something, need something, or feel entitled to something. And their response to all of it is quiet withdrawal. Silence is not cruelty. Silence is self-defense. They learned that in the economy of their old relationships, they were not an equal partner. They were the resource. Keeping those friendships would require them to step back into the role of emotional supplier, and that is a role they can no longer afford. The entry price to their life has changed. It used to cost nothing. Now it requires balance, effort, and mutual care. Most people cannot or will not meet that price. Do not assume you can pull them back into who they used to be. People who once gave endlessly no longer give automatically. They have stepped away from the job of managing other people's emotions. They are no longer on call. Many who hear this will recognize themselves in it. You may have noticed how giving slowly drained you more than you understood at the time. If this feels familiar, it is because it follows a pattern. That pattern was not random or accidental. The empath loner is often misunderstood as gentle, passive, or harmless. People mistake their quiet for weakness. What most fail to recognize is that this calm presence exists because something powerful has already been integrated inside them. This soft appearance hides a psychological truth that is far less sentimental. The real change does not happen because they became better or nicer. It happens because they finally made contact with the parts of themselves they were never allowed to show. They made peace with their darker impulses instead of fighting them. Carl Jung used the term shadow to describe the parts of the personality we push away and deny. These are the traits we were taught were unacceptable, the unlit rooms of the self. For the empath, the shadow is not criminal or evil in a dramatic sense. It is the ability to be angry, selfish, emotionally distant, firm, and disagreeable. For most of their life, the empath pushed these traits down. They believed anger made them bad. They believed choosing themselves made them selfish. They believed saying no made them unloving. So they buried these impulses deep in the unconscious to protect the image of being kind, helpful, and good. They judged their own aggression as a flaw instead of a signal. But the shadow cannot stay buried forever. As the exhaustion from years of overgiving grew heavier, the shadow began to surface. Small cracks appeared. The empath started feeling sudden resentment toward the people they were always helping. They felt irritation they could not explain. They noticed a quiet disgust toward endless neediness. They began to imagine leaving without explanation and never returning. The turning point comes when they stop fighting these feelings and finally listen to them. They realize resentment is not evil, it is information. It is the nervous system announcing that a boundary has been crossed. Anger is not a moral failure. It is protective energy waking up after a long sleep. When the empath loner integrates this shadow, something fundamental changes. They are no longer harmless. A harmless person cannot hurt anyone even if they must. A peaceful person can, but chooses restraint. The integrated empath can walk away without guilt. They can cut off access without drama. They can say no without explaining themselves. They can watch someone struggle with consequences without jumping in to rescue them. This integration pulls psychic energy away from the social mask they once wore. They stop investing effort into appearing nice or agreeable. This shift makes them immune to many forms of manipulation. Most manipulation depends on your fear of being seen as bad. When someone says, "I thought you cared about me," they are pressing on your old wound. They expect you to panic and prove your goodness. They expect you to abandon yourself to maintain their comfort. But the integrated empath has already accepted that they cannot save everyone. When accused of being selfish, they do not collapse. They quietly agree, "Yes, I am choosing myself." When told they have become cold, they do not rush to soften. They understand that the coldness is a boundary doing its job. You cannot shame someone who has already accepted their limits. You cannot guilt someone who values survival more than approval. This is why they become threatening to the wrong people, not because they attack, but because they no longer react. Manipulators need emotional movement. Dependence requires access. The integrated empath provides neither. When someone cannot provoke you, cannot guilt you, cannot pull energy from you, they are forced to face their own lack of control. This is deeply unsettling for those who relied on the empath's compliance. The old buttons no longer work. Guilt, obligation, praise, withdrawal, silence, or pressure lose their power. The emotional wiring has been cut. The empath meets the world with a steady, unbothered presence. They are not chasing approval. They are not afraid of judgment. Jung taught that integrating the shadow is the path to wholeness. The empath loner becomes whole by reclaiming the power to refuse. They take back the word no. This makes them formidable. They are no longer begging for love by being good. They stand in sovereignty. They know they have a dark side, a side that prefers solitude, a side that judges, a side that rejects, and they use that side to protect what is gentle within them. They keep no friends because most friendships required the empath to hide this shadow. Most people only want the agreeable version, the version without boundaries, the version that absorbs discomfort quietly. They do not want honesty that disrupts comfort. The empath understands this. They know friendship often demands self-betrayal. They would rather be alone in truth than imprisoned in false harmony. When others encounter an empath loner, they often describe the experience as uncomfortable or unsettling. There is a strange tension in the air. Something feels missing. That discomfort does not come from what the empath does. It comes from what they refuse to do. Most interactions rely on unconscious exchanges of validation. People project identities and expect them to be reflected back. Laughter confirms worth. Agreement confirms belonging. Sympathy confirms innocence. Jung described this as unconscious participation, where the ego looks to others to feel real. The empath loner steps out of this loop. They no longer act as a mirror. When you speak, they do not automatically reflect your self-image. They do not laugh on cue. They do not offer comfort when suffering is self-created. They do not fill silence out of fear. They observe. They listen. They remain neutral. To someone addicted to validation, this feels like rejection. When your projection is not caught, it falls back onto you. You are left facing your own unresolved energy. The discomfort is not judgment, it is exposure. We use politeness and noise to hide how separate we truly are. The empath loner removes the cover. They allow silence to exist. They let friction remain. For many people, this is unbearable. Silence reveals insecurity. Neutrality exposes dependence. The empath loner does not intend to disturb, but their presence forces others to confront themselves, and that is why their quiet feels so loud. Of anxiety. You may have tried to trigger a response just to break the heavy silence, asking personal questions, making dramatic comments, or sharing too much information. You were trying to pull them back into the familiar game of emotional ping pong. You wanted a reaction so the tension would disappear, but the empath does not lift the paddle anymore. Jung would explain this by saying the empath has become a blank screen for the projections of others. Because they are no longer sending a clear signal that says, I like you, or I need you, or I approve of you, the unconscious mind of the other person starts filling in the empty space. People project their own fears, doubts, and insecurities into that silence. If you are unsure about your intelligence, you will interpret the empath's quiet presence as intellectual arrogance. If you are insecure about your place in society, you will read their solitude as snobbery or superiority. If you carry hidden guilt about your own actions, you will feel as if they are silently judging you without saying a word. You are not actually seeing the empath at all. You are seeing your own shadow reflected back at you through the stillness of their expression. This is why they are so often misunderstood and mislabeled. They are called cold, arrogant, distant, unfriendly, strange, or emotionally unavailable. These labels are defensive reactions. It is far easier to label the quiet loner as flawed or broken than to confront the anxiety that their silence awakens inside you. The empath loner understands this mechanism deeply. They have watched it play out again and again, dozens of times, sometimes hundreds. They know that the moment they stop performing the role of the patient listener, people begin to resent them. They know that when they stop giving emotional reassurance, others feel rejected. And in a very real sense, it is a rejection. It is the rejection of the false self. The empath is quietly signaling that they will no longer take part in interactions that are shallow, forced, or dishonest. They are no longer willing to fake emotional connection just to help someone feel at ease. This level of honesty is harsh. It removes the social mask and exposes the interaction in its raw form. Most people cannot tolerate this rawness for long. They walk away feeling uneasy, exhausted, or confused, and they blame the empath for the uncomfortable energy. In truth, the empath simply refuses to carry emotional weight that does not belong to them. The empath keeps very few friends, sometimes none at all, because they are exhausted by performance. They know that keeping people around would require them to start mirroring again. They would have to pretend to care deeply about small dramas that do not matter. They would have to ignore their own insights and silence their intuition. they are no longer willing to pay that cost. They would rather feel unsettled in their solitude than feel secure inside a lie. There comes a point when the rules quietly change. A psychological line is crossed, and once crossed, returning to the old way of being is no longer possible. There is a specific and irreversible moment in the psychological development of the empath where the basic operating system of their mind shifts. This is not a slow drift over time, it is a clear rupture. Before this point, the guiding principle of their life was connection. After this point, the guiding principle becomes truth. This shift reverses the direction of their inner world. For most of their life, the empath's emotional responsiveness was automatic. It happened before conscious thought had time to intervene. If someone nearby felt sad, the empath's body reflected that sadness immediately. If someone was angry, the empath's nervous system sensed danger and moved quickly to calm the situation. The boundary between self and other was thin and open, allowing outside emotions to flow in without resistance. This was the stage of unconscious merging. But repeated emotional exhaustion forces the psyche to adapt or collapse. The empath loner is someone moving through what Carl Jung described as individuation. This is the process of becoming a separate and distinct individual rather than a reflection of the group. The old habit tries to activate, the urge to open up, to support, to rescue, to fix. But a new mental function steps in. It creates a pause. Inside that pause, the empath asks a hard and honest question. Is this interaction real for me, or am I doing it out of habit? This single question reshapes every relationship in their life. It means access to their inner world is no longer automatic. It now requires truth. The empath stops being a public place where anyone can enter freely. They become a private home with a locked door. This change in behavior often shocks people who knew them before. The empath stops volunteering emotional labor. They stop giving advice that was never requested. They stop rushing to fill uncomfortable silences. They stop solving problems that do not belong to them. They come to understand that much of what they once called kindness or loyalty was actually interference. By constantly rescuing others from their emotions, they were preventing growth. Jung taught that every person must carry the weight of their own life, and carrying it for them robs them of development. The empath loner accepts this truth. They step back. They allow people to struggle. They allow people to sit with discomfort. This is the crossing point. It is the moment they understand that their first responsibility is not to the emotional comfort of others, but to the honesty of their own soul. After this line is crossed, the old strategies people use to control them stop working. In the past, people used history as leverage. They would say things like, "We have been friends for years," implying obligation. The empath now sees through this logic. They recognize that much of the past closeness was built on their own lack of boundaries. They understand that people often miss the version of them that was easy to use, not who they truly are. Guilt used to work as well. Someone would say, "I really need you right now," using crisis to demand attention. The empath now pauses and evaluates. Do you need me, or do you need someone to absorb your chaos? They can tell the difference between true support and emotional dumping. They are no longer vulnerable to emotional blackmail. This is not because they stopped caring. It is because they care more about reality than emotional pressure. They see the structure behind the interaction. They notice the hook hidden inside the request. When guilt appears, they treat it as information, not instruction. This level of awareness makes casual friendship difficult. Casual relationships rely on unconscious blindness. People agree not to notice manipulation to keep things smooth. The empath loner refuses this agreement. They see motives clearly. They notice constant interruptions. They notice questions that are only setups. They notice mismatched tone and words. Before, they ignored these signs to preserve connection. Now they treat them as warnings. Once seen, they cannot be unseen. They cannot return to innocence. Jung said awareness is heavy because it separates you from the group. The empath accepts this weight. They understand that many people use friendship as a way to extract energy without giving back. Because of this threshold, they often end up alone. They cannot relate to those still operating unconsciously. It feels like speaking different languages. Values no longer align. The empath chooses clarity. The world chooses comfort. The empath chooses truth. The world chooses politeness. This results in a ruthless clearing of relationships. The empath loner does not slowly fade away. They often cut ties cleanly. When they see that a relationship is built on the idea that they exist to serve, they end it. They do not explain because explanations invite arguments meant to pull them back into the old role.